virtue of tolerance. Jeremy Hunt says protests in Britain against the war in Gaza have crossed a line, leading to people feeling intimidated and unsafe. Well, those who preach hate could be blocked from entering Britain. Reports claim the government is planning to identify and add dangerous extremists to visa warning lists. They'd then automatically be refused entry to the UK. It's understood the new plans will extend current powers to include those who preach racism, intimidation, or those who incite violence. It follows a warning from the Prime Minister on Friday that democracy is being threatened by a rise in extremism. A Labour government would make all police in England and Wales undergo mandatory training on combating violence against women. The proposals would revamp vetting procedures to prevent those with a history of domestic abuse or sexual offences from joining the police. This week, a report found Wayne Couzens should never have been employed as an officer because of his past behaviour. And today marks 3 years since he killed Sarah Everard after tricking her into thinking she was being arrested. Couzens was sentenced to life in prison and will never be released. A 7-year-old girl's died after a migrant boat carrying 16 people capsized in the English Channel. She'd been travelling with her pregnant mother, her father and 3 siblings when the boat got into difficulty in the early hours of this morning. Videos filmed inside prisons are to be banned as the government moves to crack down on harmful content being posted online. A loophole in current laws means videos can be posted online as long as they're not posted by somebody in custody. The new laws, though, would criminalise the posting of video, photos and audio recordings taken while in prison, regardless of whether the uploader is behind bars. Filming of staff will also be banned, as well as content captured by drones. Anyone found breaching the laws could be liable for an unlimited fine. 2 people have been charged after they poured porridge and jam on a bust of Queen Victoria at an art museum in Glasgow. Saoirse Ní Merton and Hannah Taylor also painted a derogatory term across the plinth at the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum. The pair from the campaign group This Is Rigged reportedly then glued themselves to the bust. The group says it carried out the vandalism to protest against increasing food insecurity. Donald Trump's hoping to take another step towards becoming the Republican Party candidate for November's presidential election, with voting underway in Washington, D.C. He won in Missouri, Michigan and Idaho last night to continue his clean sweep of states. An election rematch with President Biden is therefore now looking even more likely, with the new poll giving Mr. Trump a lead. But he has made several false claims in rallies, including allegations that Joe Biden is smuggling people across the border. His road to the White House, though, is likely to be complicated by the various legal troubles Mr. Trump is facing. 91 felony counts across 4 states and several lawsuits. And last night's Brit Awards were dominated by the singer-songwriter Ray in a stunning turnaround for the 26-year-old after she was dumped by her old record label. Let's show you the moment she claimed one of the top honours.
I'm so proud of this album. I'm in love with music. All I ever wanted to be was an artist. And now I'm an artist with an album of the year!
While taking to the stage with her grandmother, Ray took home several more awards. She got the Album and Artist of the Year, the Best New Artist. She was named Songwriter of the Year and won the R&B category's public vote. In total, that's an astonishing 6 awards, the most in a single year. So congratulations to Ray. For more on all of our stories, sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan that QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. And now it is time for the Camilla Tominey Show.
As ever on a Sunday morning, we're going to kick off with the papers, and I'm delighted to be joined now by Sam Lister, political editor at the Daily Express. Sam, lovely to see you this morning. Lots to go at, actually, but let's go with budget bonanza, because all of the papers obviously are trying to predict what Jeremy Hunt's going to put in the budget. He does these interviews. He's done one with the Sunday Telegraph talking about going to war on Whitehall Waste. Fair enough. But don't you find it quite funny that he does these rounds and people say, what's in the budget then? And he goes, no, I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
And what's the point? Why do we go through this dance? chance twice a year now, isn't it? So very, very difficult for interviewers like you to try and get something out of him, but I'm sure you will succeed, Camilla.
We'll try our best.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're in this pre-budget period now. Everyone's looking to Wednesday. But we're really in kind of scrabbling around in the back of the sofa territory here.
Yes.
There clearly is no money.
Gone?
It's disappeared. It started out at 30 billion. We hear now it's down to around 12 billion. You've got to save around half of that just for rainy day purposes, which leaves you with only around 6 billion.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of money to play with. So he's looking clearly at measures to grab a bit of money here, grab a bit of money there.
It's not very sexy, this. It
it's
isn't
not
going to win an election, Sam.
It's not. And it's the Sun branded today, the Tesco budget, every little helps.
Oh.
And so he's taken a bit potentially from people who have second homes and rent them out to people.
Yeah, that'll
a little bit here, a little bit
second
there.
homes, won't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe he'll try and tap up Angela Rayner on that one. No, there's a story about that in the Mail on Sunday. But also this argument that actually he has to be prudent. It's difficult, isn't it? People are crying out for tax cuts. There's a sort of debate going on, at least among the commentariat, as to whether it should be 1 or 2p off income tax. He's then kind of rolled out this pledge to cut this Whitehall waste, although, hang on, we've heard that all before. He's saying that that's going to save so many billion, but don't people need to see what we call in the trade retail offerings?
Absolutely.
They have to be really clear about what they're getting.
It has to be very, very simple, and it has to have a real impact in people's pockets. There is no point at this point, a few months out from a general election, doing something tricksy, something clever, something, you know, we take a bit here, we take a bit there. It has to be very, very clear. What MPs are telling me is they need a very clear offer to voters. They need to be able to go out on the doorstep and sell something. And after the last few years of real hardship, following, to be fair, the COVID pandemic, the invasion of Ukraine, the government coffers have really been stretched. People do understand that. But I think now patience is one thing. They want to see some real action that makes a big impact in their pockets. And that's what Tory MPs want to be able to sell on the doorstep. So he has to make something quite big, a big offer on Wednesday. But obviously the finances are very restrictive.
I mean, they can say on the doorstep, we've cut tax if he does come out with a tax cut on Wednesday, but at the same time I suppose people might think, well, you were the ones who put it up in the first place. You've broken your manifesto pledge. And of course he's got Rachel Reeves. I know Rachel Reeves has been in the right-wing press quite a lot. She did an interview with the Telegraph yesterday. She's in the Sun on Sunday today, so she's on manoeuvres hoping to entice some disgruntled Tories over to the Labour camp, which is interesting. The other big story of the weekend, Sam, is of course the terror threat, and people are reacting and riffing off this speech that Rishi Sunak gave on Friday. Odd timing, that. What did you make of it?
It was very odd. It was very odd. It was we got notice very late in the day. Obviously, then that set hairs racing. Everyone's thinking, is this the Prime Minister about to announce a general election? They had to kind of then tell us all, actually, no, this is not going to be about a general election. It's about security. But to make a statement in Downing Street is quite an unusual thing to do. It usually is because you are announcing a general election because you've won one, or because there's been a terror attack. I don't remember one just on a general kind of point of principle like this. Particularly not on a Friday night when it's too late to make the 6 o'clock news.
Did you, as a political editor of a national newspaper, have to say, hold the front page?
Absolutely, we had to rip up our front page. But unfortunately for the Chancellor, he was going to be on our front page, but he was bumped by the Prime Minister.
That was weird timing, wasn't it?
It was very strange timing.
He wants to do all of the budget stuff and suddenly we're talking about extremism.
Yeah.
We now hear from the Mail on Sunday that the terror threat is the highest it's been since 9/11.
Yeah. I don't think that will come as a surprise to people because obviously the impact of the Middle East unrest, the invasion, clearly is having huge ramifications, not just in the UK, but across the world, certainly in America. And obviously we've seen across the UK the demonstrations, the feeling of unrest, the feeling of tension. So I don't think anybody will be surprised by that. I think just on a kind of very kind of personal level, I think a lot of MPs do feel very, very much under threat personally across the House, actually. It's not just limited to one party, this. And they do feel very, very concerned. Obviously, we've seen Mike Freer announce that he is standing down because he's basically, he cannot cope anymore with the level of threat.
Word of those 3 female MPs having to have bodyguards, even though they're backbenchers now, which is disturbing. And also, I suppose, there is some chat, and I'll put this to Robert Jenrick in just a moment because he's going to come into the studio after you. You know, is it just a commentary that the government's running? Where are the solutions? It was a great speech. I thought he spoke brilliantly, and he reflected very much the sort of feelings of Middle England in a way. But at the same time, where are the actions? Where are the measures? Ban the marches then.
His big thing was, we will introduce a new framework, and actually that doesn't really feel very much to people at home.
Framework doesn't sound like
doesn't feel like
effective
grabbing
action.
the bull by the horns, does it?
Talking about bulls, nice little segue. Red Bull and the Horners being Red Bullish. Now, I mentioned this, we normally talk about politics, but it is a really big story this weekend, and it's been covered in all of the papers. Jerry Spice, Jerry Horner, Jerry Halliwell, as she was once known, appears at the Bahrain Grand Prix after Mr Horner has been accused, obviously, of sending these texts. We haven't got the contents of the text for privacy and other legal reasons. But at the same time, I just thought we'd have a conversation woman to woman about what you feel about Jerry sort of being produced onto the world stage at the Formula One to look as if everything's fine. It was like a Tammy Wynette, stand by your man moment.
It was all a bit 90s sleaze, wasn't it? You know, the kind of the kind of Tory MP from the 90s wheeling out his wife to the gate of the garden.
Nothing to see here,
everything's fine. I mean, what goes on in a marriage, you know, who knows? But wheeling out the wife in this way is always a bit sticks in my craw, I have to say. You know, there she was in the white designer dress,
she only ever
holding
wears
his hand.
white.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting policy from a fashion perspective. But then again, if she hadn't have turned up at the Grand Prix with him, it would have looked really sus, wouldn't it? I mean, she's taken one for the Red Bull team, I would suggest.
Yeah, she's kind of damned if she does, damned if she doesn't. But I feel like in this day and age, do women really have to be wheeled out in this way? I think it's a bit sad, really.
I know. I think the public sympathy will be on Jerry's side very much.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to finish with this because I know GB viewers and listeners will be very familiar with that iconic theme tune of Bergerac. What's happening in the news with Bergerac, Sam?
It's coming back.
Yay!
Great
I love Bergerac.
Sunday night viewing, everyone loved Bergerac. I mean, a bit of glamour, lovely cars, crimes.
With Jim Nettles or somebody else?
I think it's going to be somebody else, but apparently big names are promised on this.
Ooh, which big names do we think?
We don't know.
James Norton.
Oh, it could be.
I'm just guessing now.
In a bomber jacket and a knee type.
Oh,
yeah, great. Sounds lovely.
So back to Jersey with crime being top of the agenda, top of the TV agenda. Sam, always lovely to have you in studio.
Pleasure.
Thank you for taking us through what's been going on this morning. Now, the People's Panel, which we know and love, is in Birmingham. And don't forget, Birmingham is in trouble because the council, the Labour-run council, has just announced it's going bankrupt. So I'm very intrigued to speak to Jack Carsons, who's there in Birmingham with the People's Panel this morning to find out what the main topic of conversation is. And it's not a no-go zone, is it? I know Paul Scully described Birmingham or parts of Birmingham like that in the week. But how are the good folk there, Jack?
Well, it's certainly been a very friendly welcome this morning here, Camilla, at the Cherry Reds Cafe, right in the city centre of Birmingham. But, of course, as you were mentioning, a really big week, not, of course, just for the country with the budget, but also the council here in Birmingham are going to vote on their new budget, of course, with all these hundreds of millions of pounds worth of cuts coming because of that bankruptcy. We've got our People's Panel here this morning with Sabrina Dennis, Steve Hardiman and Andrew Goodacre with us this morning. Sabrina, we're going to come to you first. You run a youth charity here in the city, of course. We've also got Bridget Phillipson on the panel on the show today. What kind of questions have you got today?
I'm interested to know what they're thinking about investment for our young people in the future. I mean, we've looked at everything and there's cuts everywhere, cuts to school budgets, cuts to youth services, cuts to charity work, cuts to everything. There's no safe spaces for young people. I want to know what they are planning to do with our young people because there is nothing for them.
Okay, and Steve, you run a manufacturing business here in the West Midlands. Budget this week. What could Jeremy Hunt, or what questions have you got?
Well, I'd like to know what he's going to do for SMEs in the budget. I've never known such a hostile business environment as the one we're living in at the moment. And basically, I'm hoping that he's going to give us some sort of relief from the terrible troubles that we've had. But I doubt whether we're going to get that.
Okay, and Andrew, you're part of the British Independent Retailers Association. So, what kind of questions have you got for the Chancellor and for Labour on today about the coming week in the budget?
Well, like Steve's business is an SME, our members, independent retailers, are SMEs. So we certainly want to see something in the budget that helps independent retailers. The high streets have struggled in the cost of living crisis. We need something that's going to give us growth, economic certainty, and boost consumer spending. Wider than that, we need to know what's the plan for local communities who need investment, who need alternative ways of thinking, not just for our generation, but for younger generations as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for all of the panel for those questions. Some big topics for you to discuss today, Camilla.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Welcome back to Headliners, and Paul, we're going to get straight into Monday's mail for some good old-fashioned, traditional male breastfeeding.
Yeah. To answer the question, what is the latest woke hell, Josh? Row as hospitals say hormone-filled milk from trans women who were born male is just as good for a baby as the real thing. It's possible for men, if they pump themselves full of estrogen, to grow larger breast tissue, and they often do. If
or you just eat lots of burgers.
Exhibit A. And once you've done that, it is actually then possible to express or lactate a liquid. Okay. If to that liquid you then add another load of pills, medication, chemicals, whatever, that lactation juice can be fed to a baby.
We don't really... This is not for the sake of the baby. The baby has no benefits from this whatsoever. The studies are very weak on it. It's a bit worrying because, you know, when hospitals started indulging in homeopathy and having, the NHS had homeopathic hospitals, that was worrying because they're supposed to be a trusted authority. And before saying something like this, there should be an awful lot of study done.
I want to shame this hospital. This is
whether it's necessary.
University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust. That's who it is. And they have written one of the stupidest sentences that I have read aloud in the 2 years that I've been privileged to do this show. It says, the term human milk is meant to be neutral and not gender biased.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yep.
Oh, my God, we're laughing at you.
I mean, and as someone says here, babies are not props. And that's the scary thing. And when we're not focusing primarily on the health of a baby.
No, but the feeling of a person doing it rather than... It's a bit of an odd way to go, isn't it? So...
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, the Conservative MP for Newark. Nice to see you, Robert.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming back into the studio. You've written a really interesting op-ed, an opinion piece in the Mail on Sunday, which is headlined, "Why does the left consider it Islamophobic to want to expel the cancer of extremism from Britain?" It's a very compelling piece where you talk about what the government should be doing. Now, I suppose my first question is, what's your reaction to what Rishi Sunak said on the steps of Downing Street on Friday night? It was punchy rhetoric, but I thought it was conspicuous by its absence of actual measures to stop what's going on.
Well, I thought it was a good start. It's important to recognise the problem if you're going to start to fix it. But you're absolutely right that at this late stage, all that matters are solutions. And the first one, to me, is that you cannot resolve this problem, build a more united country, which is what the Prime Minister was calling for, a more cohesive country built around British values, unless you end this era of mass migration, we've been living in a time where up to 1 million people have arrived in our country every year, and it's impossible to successfully integrate so many people. The level of migration that we've experienced as a country over the last 30 years has been unprecedented, and that needs to change.
So are you saying that we've been importing Islamic extremists? I mean, at the same time, many of the people that may be that vocal minority calling for jihad on the streets of London could be born here.
Absolutely, but I think it's an important part of the solution to say that you can't integrate people at this pace, and we have to row back on that now, and we have to move to a system where immigration is controlled and orderly, and the numbers are just very significantly fewer. But that's not the only part of the solution.
Do we move back to tens of thousands?
I think we need to. I was elected on a manifesto pledge of tens of thousands. If you look at all of the polling of the public, that is around the level that they would expect. In fact, many people would like it to be less than that. And for a range of reasons, not just these important social questions, economically, in terms of the pressure on housing and public services, we've got to get it down to that level.
We're told mass migration is a great thing for the economy because more people are paying tax. You know, this is something I'll put to the Chancellor, this idea that migration has overwhelmingly good economic benefits. I mean, I think that's been disproven by the fact that there's a shortage of housing and our public services are seeming to be completely crippled. But at the same time, the Treasury seems to be addicted to migration.
Well, I think there's mounting evidence to support what you've just said. For the past 7 quarters, the British economy has shrunk by GDP per capita.
Yes.
And I think that is all that should matter to our government and to politicians. I don't care about the size of the pie. Overall, I care about the wealth and prosperity of each and every one of our fellow citizens.
Why won't government ministers put a cap on migration? I mean, I've had so many people in that seat and I've asked them that question and they just resist it, even though David Cameron was really clear when he gave his tens of thousand pledge.
Well, I think we should move to that kind of system. I think we now need to move to something that's radically different. I was pleased at the end of last year I brokered the biggest reduction in migration that we've seen for a very long time, which will lead to 300,000 fewer people coming in each year. But that's not enough. We need to go much further than that. And in the piece I've written today in the Mail on Sunday, I'm drawing the connection between that and the fraying social fabric that we're seeing as a country. And that, I think, is a very important element of this.
Aren't you risking being accused of Islamophobia with some of these interventions? We've heard from others, including Nick Timothy, who was Theresa May's former advisor. He's now a candidate, a Tory candidate, I think, in Suffolk. He's saying that actually the government needs to go much, much further. Not only should they ban the marches, they should also stop the funding of mosques and Islamic centres. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with much of what Nick has said. We need a completely different approach to this. And you're right to say that many people are too afraid to intervene in this debate because either they want to pretend this doesn't exist or they know it does, but they're afraid of being labelled as an Islamophobe. And that is not a healthy way for us to proceed.
Is Lee Anderson an Islamophobe?
No, I don't think he is.
Should he have the whip restored, do you think? I mean, has he said anything wrong? He said nothing worse than what David Cameron said about Sadiq Khan in 2016. He said the leader of the Labour Party is saying it's disgraceful, telling him, he was referring to somebody, that the honourable member for Tooting has appeared on a platform with an extremist 9 times, Cameron said at the time. This man supports the Islamic State, he pointed out. We then had Zach Goldsmith saying that Sadiq Khan was a politician who had, quotes, given platforms, oxygen and even cover over and over again to those who seek to do our police and capital harm. So actually, Lee Anderson said nothing worse than the Foreign Secretary and Zach Goldsmith, a former minister.
Well, Lee is not an Islamophobe. He made comments which were mistaken. He's clarified those now. And I think we need to move on, because the problem with what happened over the last week is that it's closed down the debate on the really important issue, which is that we have a problem in this country with Islamist extremism, and we need a proper national conversation about that and a strategy to tackle it. All that matters now are the solutions, and they are reducing mass migration, ending this era of careless, naive mass migration, having a new strategy, taking the Prevent programme forward with the reforms that Suella Braverman
Tell me
set
about
forward.
Prevent. Is Prevent fit for purpose? currently? I mean, I know William Shawcross...
It's not working at the moment.
Expressed concern about...
That's right. So William Shawcross did a very important review, which is being implemented, but it needs to be implemented very quickly. And at the heart of the problem that he identified is that it has been a victim of political correctness. The overwhelming majority of the people who we should be concerned about today are Islamist extremists. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about the far right. The far right is just as divisive and destructive, but it is a smaller threat today than Islamist extremism. Therefore, the majority of our effort and focus should be on Islamist extremism, and that is not the way that the Prevent programme is working today. So we need to refocus it on the real threat to our country and not be afraid to do that out of misplaced political correctness.
Do you think that there's a problem that not enough moderate Muslims are calling out the extremists in their midst?
Well, Islamist extremism is not Islam, and it's not the law-abiding British Muslim population. We need to make that clear. And it's wrong when people label those of us who are very concerned about Islamist extremism as anti-Muslim. I care just as much about anti-Muslim hatred and prejudice in this country as I do about anti-Semitism, for example. Not a competition between the two. We do need to see, I think, more Muslim voices, moderate Muslim voices, and there are many people who are making this point, coming out and leading this national conversation about how we can get rid of, expel this cancer of Islamophobia, of anti-Muslim hatred from the country once and for all.
We see on the front of the Mail on Sunday that it's now considered that with the threat level to people living in Britain is the highest it has been since 9/11. Do you think there's a correlation between how the police have handled the marches and this fear of extremism escalating even further? Do you think the police are perhaps treating the marches almost with kid gloves because they don't want it to escalate into, God forbid, a terror attack at some point?
Well, I want to see, as in fact the Prime Minister said last week, more active policing. We don't want to just manage these protests, we want to police these protests. And many people, for example British Jews, have found the police to be too passive. And I found this and have spoken out about this many times. For example, when you had a hate preacher near Oxford Street calling for jihad and the police stood by, allowed that individual to continue. That's completely unacceptable.
I mean, it was wrong for the police to say, oh, jihad has got many different meanings. It's wrong as well, surely.
Well, that was both factually wrong. It was a misreading of jihad, but it was also completely unacceptable. We need to have a much stronger policing presence on the streets of London and elsewhere.
What should have happened to the people who projected from the river to the sea onto Big Ben?
They should have been arrested immediately. We shouldn't just sit back and allow that to happen. I thought that was a gross act which really symbolised where we'd got to as a country, where a genocidal chant could be projected onto our parliament, whilst Parliament itself was debating some of these issues. I think that is an example of where the British public are crying out for much stronger policing. And I think there's a fear that there is cowardice here. People are not willing to step up and take the action that's necessary.
It's mixed messaging, isn't it, from the Prime Minister? Because on one hand, he decides that Suella Braverman must go, the Home Secretary, the former Home Secretary who worked closely with at the Home Office, because she's pointing out that the police are picking favourites and that they're taking sides, and she has repeatedly warned against Islamic extremism and said about the dangers. He then gives a speech in Downing Street basically saying exactly what Suella's been saying. Has this now vindicated Braverman, do you think?
I think many of the arguments that Suella was making 4 or 5 months ago have been proven to be absolutely right. Is there a genuine concern that there is two-tier policing in this country? Yes, I think that she was right to say that that's a concern. Would some of these incidents be policed differently? Were they far-right versus the Islamic extremist element that we're seeing? I think there's a strong case to say that there is. But what matters now, I think, is less around the personalities or the sentiments. I'm pleased to see that the Prime Minister has adopted much of the rhetoric that Suella and I have been saying for several months. What matters are solutions and answers to this question. That's what the public's crying out for now.
Really briefly, because we're running out of time, Rochdale, George Galloway, I mean, has that now become a no-go area for Jews, do you think?
No, I don't think so, and I certainly hope not. I think it's very concerning that George Galloway was elected. The campaign was a nasty and sectarian campaign. I don't like to see someone standing for office in our country putting the flag of another country on their literature. But what I think really matters now is to try to unite the country with action to tackle Islamist extremism.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for joining me in the studio this morning.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
You're now in exile. I imagine it wouldn't be safe for you to go back to Russia. Can I ask you if you feel safe personally, and what do you think can be done to remove Putin, or is he going to be there for as long as he wants?
I think that is, of course, fundamental question. It is there should be pressure inside Russia and outside. Inside Russia right now, it's impossible because Putin put all leaders in jail and some of us just abroad. You know, just two were already killed. Mr. Nemtsov, Boris Nemtsov, my friend, my collaborator on my party, was killed on the walls on Kremlin. Alexei Navalny was killed in jail and in the camp. And that is, the people live in fear to identify themselves as protesters, to identify themselves as against Putin's regime, etc. That's why today there is no chance for opposition to rise inside Russia. But outside, of course, this war against Ukraine, that is the fundamental issue for all foreign leaders. And in fact, just support of Ukraine and not to let Putin to destroy Ukraine, to defeat Ukraine. That is an important issue because just Ukraine, that's not just in Ukraine, war in Ukraine. Ukraine just fighting for their territorial integrity, but fighting for the whole European countries because after Ukraine, other countries could appear, other subject of aggression could be, and Putin easily could try to test Article 5 of NATO Charter. It could be one of the small countries of Baltic states.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Joining me now in the studio is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt. Chancellor, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you so much for coming in. I think it's your first appearance with me on GB News, so it's great to have you.
The first one in the studio.
Indeed so, yes. We've done down-the-line interviews. Can we start, just before we get onto the budget, to talk about Rishi Sunak's speech on Friday outside Downing Street? He talked a lot about the current situation with extremism. Obviously, he was reacting to the election of George Galloway in Rochdale. I felt that it was a good commentary, but there weren't very many action points in there. Is the government all talk and no action on extremism? What measures are you going to introduce to try and stop this?
No, he was clear that there are things the government needs to do. What he was really saying is that we have a traditional British virtue of tolerance. And what we've seen in the last few months is a line being crossed with protests that are intimidatory, that have led to some people feeling it's not safe to go out of their homes when they're going on. That is not the British way. He said the government will legislate to ban intimidatory marches, give the police the powers they need to stop them.
Yes.
But he's also said that there's a responsibility on all of us. And he pointed out the vast majority of people on these protests want to protest
peacefully,
Yes.
they too have a responsibility to call out extremism when it happens.
But weren't people watching that speech and thinking, it's great, you've identified the problems, but what are the solutions? I mean, people are saying, in fact, James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, has said, you know, you've made your point with the marches now, just stop them. Why doesn't the government stop them? We had Suella Braverman in the studio a few weeks ago saying the police have got the powers, they're just not using them. So why not stop the marches now? Because unfortunately they have been hijacked by a small minority.
Well, we have asked the police to use the powers they have. As I said, we've also said that we will legislate to give them additional powers. We've said that we will expel people who cross that line if they are foreign nationals, and we will prescribe organisations that promote that kind of behaviour, like Hizb ut-Tahrir. But we are also very clear, this is about our whole country. This is not just something for the government. This is about restoring that traditional British virtue of tolerance, that understanding that the way you get change in this country is through peaceful protest within the law. But if those protests are within the law, of course, we will always support people's right to do them.
I mean, you've been a politician for a long time. Do you feel more intimidated and threatened now than you have been in the past?
Well, I actually live in Downing Street now, so I hear those protests often at the weekend. Personally, I would never say that I'm worried, but I have had very disturbing emails, particularly from Jewish friends,
yes,
who say that some of this behaviour makes them frightened to go out of their front door. And that is not the Britain that I want, or I think anyone wants, and that's why it's right to take action.
Let's talk about the economic Britain that you want. Obviously, the budget, there's a lot of pressure on you on Wednesday to deliver. Many people are saying this is last chance saloon for the Tories. Do you recognise that this budget could be make or break when it comes to the next general election?
Of course, budgets are very, very important moments. This is likely to be the last budget before the general election. But British people are very smart. They recognise gimmicks. They don't want any tricks. What they will get on Wednesday is a prudent and responsible plan for long-term growth.
I mean, do they want prudence, Mr Hunt? At the same time, they do recognise that the tax burden is the highest it's been in 70 years. They're desperate for some relief. They want to keep more of the money that they earn. We hear in the papers that there's a debate going on between a 1p or 2p income tax cut. Can you confirm here this morning that there will be an income tax cut?
You know, Camilla, how this works, and chancellors don't reveal the contents of their budgets, even on GBNews, however amazing the interviewer is.
But are you confident there's fiscal headroom for a tax cut in theory?
Well, let me answer the questions you asked. So, first of all, prudence. There is nothing less conservative than funding tax cuts by increasing borrowing.
But there's nothing less conservative than having a tax rate in the highest region that it has been in peacetime. That's unconservative, isn't it?
Well, let me answer. This is a bit like that sort of two Ronnie's sketch where I'm going to answer the question before last. But I'll just say, first of all, that I do want to bring taxes down. Absolutely. They're too high. And why do I want to bring them down? Because I look around the world and the most dynamic, fastest growing economies in North America and Asia are generally countries where the tax burden is lower. So yes, I want to bring them down. Why have they gone up? Because we spent nearly £500 billion supporting families in the pandemic and in the cost of living crisis. That was the right thing to do. Because of that, unemployment is at historic lows, and I think we did the right thing there. It has to be paid for. Now we need to get back on a path to lower taxes. I will do that in a responsible way. I hope to show progress, but this is not something that is going to happen overnight. But
so you're really managing expectations here. That's the vibe I'm getting from you, because at the beginning of the year you were channeling your inner Nigel Lawson and you were pitch-rolling tax cuts because I think you thought you had 30 billion of fiscal headroom. The OBR has turned around and said you've actually got 12.8 billion, but then some of your colleagues question the reliance on the OBR forecast when they're often proved to be too gloomy and wrong. Why is the OBR now dictating what should be in your budget rather than just providing some advice on the sidelines? Are you kind of entrapped by what the OBR is telling you?
Well, it was a Conservative government that set up the OBR
in 2010. And the reason that we set it up was because people worried that when Gordon Brown was doing his budgets under the previous Labour government, chancellors were cooking the books. They were giving forecasts that gave an unduly rosy picture of the situation, and people wanted to have confidence that what a chancellor said, the figures that a chancellor announced, have been independently verified.
But there's independent verification, and then there's actually dictating what should be in your budget, isn't it?
Well, all the OBR does is tell the country independently whether I am meeting the fiscal rules that I myself have chosen.
But what if the OBR is wrong, as it has been historically many years over?
Well, in fairness to the OBR, they are, of course, they made mistakes in their forecasts, but they are more accurate than the forecasts that the Treasury used to do when we didn't have an OBR, and they are broadly in line with other forecasters. But look, I don't say that, you know, there aren't things that you can improve in the systems that we have, but fundamentally what people at home want to know is that when you cut taxes, it's forever.
OK.
And that's why we want to go on this path to lower taxes. But we want to do so in a way that is credible, sustainable, and people know is responsible. OK. You're talking as well about cutting Whitehall waste. I mean, GB News viewers and listeners could be forgiven for saying to themselves, what, again? I mean, how many times has the government announced that it's going to cut Whitehall waste? The trouble is that this Whitehall waste is built up on your watch. It's built up over the course of the last 14 years. So you're having to unravel things that you're responsible for. No, I don't think that's fair, Camilla.
Well, Whitehall staffing has gone up since pre-pandemic, and indeed the cost of Whitehall has gone up. The cost of government spending is higher than it was.
Yes, but that is since the pandemic, and that's what I want to do. I want to bring the numbers of civil servants down to the level that they were before the pandemic. Between 2010 and 2019, we saw sustained increases in public sector productivity. Over that period, by the way, standards in our schools went up. Crime went down. We had more doctors and nurses in the NHS treating more people than ever before. The pandemic stopped that. And what I'm saying in the budget on Wednesday is I want to restart the process of public sector reform, because public sector productivity is 6% lower than pre-pandemic. And it is wrong to say that we should be putting more money into the public sector.
So you want fewer civil servants to be more productive?
Correct.
You want fewer people to do more?
I think we've got to stop always looking at the inputs and always saying that the way to get better public services is to spend more, and actually ask if we could be more efficient. And one of the ways that I think will be of particular interest to GB News viewers is knife crime. Now, we've halved violent crime. We're very proud of the progress that's been made. But part of that is through these things called violence reduction units, which intervene with people who might be the kind of people who would commit a knife crime. They have prevented about 130,000 knife crimes and other crimes. So we're actually going to spend money to roll those out, because we know that will save money down the line. That is the change in approach.
Are you going to be spending more money on defence?
Well, I have already spent more money on defence.
We've got Vladimir Putin is spending 7.5% of Russian GDP on defence. We're spending 2.2%. We need to spend more, don't we, with everything going on in the world?
Well, I do think going forward we will need to spend more money on defence, and we have said that as soon as it is possible to do so within our economic context, we'll increase that spending to 2.5% of GDP. But can I just say, you know, Rishi Sunak, when he was doing my job as Chancellor, gave the defence sector the biggest sustained increase in funding since the Cold War.
I know, but yet the numbers are low, aren't they? We've got the smallest amount of troops since the Napoleonic Wars, so there's concerns about defence. Very briefly, because I know you're on limited time, Mr. Hunt. Just on migration, there's been this theory, I think, that actually migration is inherently a good thing, that it's good for the economy, it's good to get more numbers in. But actually that's not quite true, is it? Because of the pressure on housing and indeed our public services. So should migration come down, and shouldn't you consider putting a cap on it as a Tory government?
I think migration in limited numbers can be beneficial. But what I think is wrong is this idea that you should get economic growth by allowing in more
Why does the Treasury
migrants.
keep on sort of being proponents of that theory then? The more people that come in, the higher the tax receipts. Why don't you put a stop to it? I mean, what was it, 745,000 last year, a record amount of immigrants coming into this country. Country can't cope with that many people.
Well, first of all, the Treasury is not a proponent of that. What we want to do is create a high-wage, high-skill economy that is not dependent on unlimited migration. Secondly, migration is too high, but it is because there were some very specific international factors.
But would there
such
be a
as
migration
Ukraine.
cap in the budget on Wednesday, perhaps?
Well, what is decided for the next Parliament will be a matter for the manifesto. But what we want to do, and what I'll be doing on Wednesday, is saying how do we move from an economy that has been dependent on migration for growth to a high-wage, high-skill economy that is not dependent on high levels of migration. And that is a profoundly different approach to the Labour Party. They have no strategy or no plan to control migration. We do. It's not been easy with the...
Although, may you be forced, if you have to hand over the reins of the Treasury to Rachel Reeves, to be leaving a note like Liam Bird did and say there's no money left?
I'm not planning to hand over any note to Rachel Reeves because I'm intending to win the next election. But what I would say is that look at the difficult decisions that I took a year ago as Chancellor to balance the books. When Labour had a financial crisis, did they take any difficult decisions before the 2010 election? No.
Okay.
And that's why they ran out of money.
Jeremy Hunt, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Camilla.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Sadiq Khan, 6.3 million on a virtue signal, load of lines. Why is he spending the people's money in this way? And why is nobody saying anything? I want to hear from Suzanne Hall, the potential Conservative candidate, or Howard Cox, the potential Reform candidate who could potentially take this off Sadiq Khan. Why are they not speaking? This is ridiculous.
Well, it was sprung on everybody. Did you know about that?
I didn't know about it.
Nobody knows. So they're spending this money. They're spending £6.3 million, and no one knew about it. Where's the press? Where are the public consultations? No one knew. I think it's a good idea to rename the train lines, because all these train lines are there are like 4 of them, 6 of them, whatever, and they're all going all these different directions. And you tell someone to come, and you don't even know the name.
Yeah, but 6.3 million. Listen, if he wants to give me 6.3 million to come up with some virtue signalling lines, I'd like to know which advertising agency he employed to do this, how long it took him, and why he's even done it in the first place. Why has he done this?
He has done this. Look, with the virtue signalling, because he's part of Team World. He's Rishi Sunak. It's this whole concept is every inclusiveness. There is no country. Nobody's English. Our own history is bad. Not my history, but whatever. The English history is bad. And it's a denial of history. It's Orwellian or something. Yeah. Not that I know about.
I think it's an absolute absurdity that Sadiq Khan should be doing that. He's got a knife crime epidemic, people stealing watches off people walking down the street.
Yes.
You've got the burglary at an all-time high. London, a lot of people are put off by it. And this is what he spent £6.3 million on.
This could have been a bit
to speak as to why.
He doesn't need to speak. People need to speak out and say, well, why didn't we know about this? But the idea, can I say something to you, Nana? The idea is right. It's like, for example, take the Northern Line. You know, there are 6 Northern Lines.
6 Northern Lines.
6 different Northern Lines, maybe more now, because one goes from Mill Hill East to Mill Hill.
This is the overground he was...
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show on GB News. Lord Norman Lamont joins me in the studio now. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer from 1990 until 1993. Lovely to see you this morning. I put a question there to Jeremy Hunt. I know you just watched the interview about the OBR. Can you clear this up for us? Because on one hand, we can understand why the OBR was set up under Gordon Brown. It was to ensure that Chancellors' budgets had checks and balances. But now it seems as if the OBR is informing what should go in the budget. Is that right?
No, I don't think so. I think what the OBR is providing is information about whether what the government is planning to do in the future is consistent with responsibility and with the fiscal rules that the government itself has set down. It's not compelling, but it would be possible for the OBR to say something and the government to ignore it.
But then again, we had Jeremy Hunt there admitting that the OBR does make mistakes. Historically, it's got a lot of its predictions wrong, and yet we're obviously saddled as taxpayers with the consequence of those bad predictions.
Well, forgive my cynicism, but I think most forecasts have to be treated with a degree of scepticism. There's nothing guaranteed about any forecast, but I think it is important to have some discipline and to have some rules. It's far better than politicians simply deciding we can spend this amount of money without anybody saying, can you afford this?
What did you make of the Chancellor's interview with me there? He was being very cautious. He was talking about prudence. I said that I felt that he was lowering expectations around an income tax cut. What was your impression?
Well, I think the Chancellor is in a very nearly impossible position. It's the last fiscal event, the last budget before an election. The demands and the pressure to do something that will transform the climate, which is actually impossible. The budget can't transform the climate just like that. He's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's not a conjurer.
No.
He can't just suddenly deliver a completely changed environment. And the most important thing, he's got to think about what is in the interests of the country. That is the number one priority. So it's got to be responsible, it's got to be affordable, but at the same time he wants to do something that will create the framework in which growth is at least possible.
Yes, but what about it being attractive to the electorate? I mean, you've got the Conservatives 20 points behind, got people taxed at the highest rate since the Second World War. We've heard MPs come in and out of the studio saying we've got to have something to sell on the doorstep. And if he doesn't cut taxes, what will they sell on the doorstep?
Well, that's just what I'm saying to you, that this is a very difficult, impossible position because he won't be able to satisfy all the demands and all the expectations. And I think you're quite right. He was trying in his interview to get people to be realistic. You know, part of being a Conservative is about facing reality and being responsible.
Even if it costs you an election?
Well, you've got to put the national interest first and doing the right thing. Do you think
Conservatives get thanked for that, though?
Well, whether you get thanked or not, you've got to do it.
I mean, he said in an interview, I think, with the Sunday Telegraph this morning, you know, that they didn't get thanked enough for what they'd done on national insurance. And indeed, perhaps they don't get the credit they deserve for the money that they gave in furlough. That seems to have come back to haunt them. So is it the case that the Tories just don't get thanked for giving people free money?
Well, I don't think politicians should be looking for gratitude.
Yes.
I think that's the wrong thing to look for. But, you know, just taking this question, which I know you're very concerned about, the tax burden and the tax burden being the highest for 70 years. What Jeremy said about the successive crises the government have had to deal with, but particularly COVID. When you think about COVID, and he said the government spent £500 billion, that is 15% of GDP. Now, if spending goes up by 15% of GDP, it's hardly surprising that the tax burden has gone up by a few percentage points.
Yes.
To cope with it. We've been through an event that in its financial impact is almost like that of a war.
Do you think the government spent too much money during COVID?
Well, I think possibly the government did spend too much money during COVID, but you didn't hear anybody saying that at the time.
But then what do you think's been more damaging for the economy? COVID or Brexit? That's the big debate that often takes place at the dinner table.
Well, I don't think Brexit's had any damaging effect on the economy, would be my own.
Tell that to the Europhiles. Why do you say that?
Well, I may say it to the... Well, if you just look at our trade statistics and our trade statistics with Europe, they're back on trend where they were before. I don't dispute that some small businesses find a lot of the form filling rather onerous. Large businesses, I think, like Nissan said the other day, they have had, to their surprise, found and actually they were coping perfectly well. I don't think it's had any harmful effect.
We have a People's panel on. It's in Birmingham at the moment. We've got two chaps on the panel who are businessmen, and they're saying about the lack of relief for people running SMEs. Do you sympathise with that? We've had 6% shaved off already fragile profit margins with this rise in corporation tax. We've talked a lot about individual income tax and household tax. What about business taxes? Do they need to come down?
Well, I think perhaps they ought to look at things like the VAT threshold for small businesses.
Raising that above 85 grand.
Yes, I think that's not that expensive, as I remember. I think that's something that maybe they ought to think about. It's this all form-filling and bureaucracy that small businesses find so difficult.
And as a former Chancellor, what's the one piece of advice you would give to Jeremy Hunt before Wednesday? I'd imagine it's quite nerve-wracking to prepare and deliver a budget.
Well, I would say stick to your own convictions, do what you think is right. That's the most important thing.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's quite a cold night tonight, some frost and dense fog patches once more. And then all eyes to the west as the next area of low pressure moves in, but it's going to take its time. Western areas seeing outbreaks of rain through Monday, northern and eastern areas holding on to dry weather until later. This evening, though, skies are clearing and temperatures are starting to fall away overnight. We'll see quite a widespread frost developing. Where winds are light, we'll see some mist and fog patches forming. Freezing fog patches as temperatures fall below freezing in the countryside. So there could be some tricky travelling conditions first thing, particularly across central southern parts of the UK. Further west, however, the winds start to increase, outbreaks of rain start to push in, and then this slowly moves north and eastwards through the day on Monday. Some heavier bursts in there possible, though parts of Scotland, northern and eastern parts of England will stay dry for much of the day. Plenty of sunny spells here, and the winds coming in from the south, temperatures lifting a little higher than the weekend, highs around 12 Celsius in the best of any brighter weather in the south. Then into Tuesday, weather systems start to clear away. We're left with a legacy of showers across some western areas, but there'll be plenty of sunny spells through the day. One or two of the showers could be on the heavy side. The next few days, it largely remains dry. There'll be some bright or sunny spells at times, temperatures above average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.